Welcome everybody to this webinar where we're going to talk about keeping your code up to standards. Don't drop the ball. So how can we be consistent from the beginning and making sure that we never compromise on this aspect to avoid problems later on in the project? My name is Eloisa. I work at Codacy's marketing team, and I'll be introducing and moderating this webinar. So let me introduce our host to you, our speaker, who is Elio. He's going to be talking about coding standards and sharing all his knowledge. Elio Rocha is our lead solutions engineer here at Codacy. So here's what we're going to learn today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so just a quick overview. First of all, we're going to have an introduction on what are coding standards. I know there are different definitions, there are different ways of looking at it. So let's first of all define coding standards and why do we need them? What are the advantages of using a coding standard and where do we even start? After that, we're going to tell you a quick story about how things can get out of hand when coding standards are not set from the beginning. So from the moment you start a project, which for some teams can be every day. This story is based on real personal experience and learnings from it. So third, we already established the challenges that development teams are facing. So how can we improve, right? What are some best practices that anyone can apply when it comes to coding standards? What are some tools we can use? And Codacy is one of those tools, but we're also going to talk about quality gates and general best practices that you can apply today. And finally, it's Q&A time. So we want to know at the end, what was your experience? What was the most painful impact that you've had from a lack of coding standards? And just feel free to ask us anything at that point by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, but we'll get to that. So without further ado, go ahead, Elio.
Thanks, Eloisa, and hi, team. Pleased to meet you. We are living amazing days regarding technological advancements. Companies like yours usually are driving the change in several areas. While doing that, you produce millions of lines of code, and there's nothing wrong with it. A good example is what happened in Github in the last, let's say, 4 years. So imagine, in 2018, they hit like 100 million open source mark. This means like creating 1.6 repos per second. Amazing number, right? In order to do that, 1.1 billion contributions happened, coming from around 27 million developers with different skill sets. Also, and they moved from 100 to 128 million only in 2 years. We're still waiting the numbers for 2022, but let's see. And these are only open source repos. We can only imagine what's going on in the private ones, okay? And following this growth, I found this sentence online and I really liked it. So once a new technology rolls over you, if you're not part of the steamroller, you're part of the road. Which means that if you're not in control, you're being controlled and you don't want that, okay? An additional number, and this one is a really scary one. 40 to 80% of the lifetime cost of a piece of software goes to maintenance, which clear states, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Now, getting into what this webinar is about. What are coding standards? While I was doing the research for this webinar, I found this sentence online and I immediately fell in love with it. It perfectly defines what it should be considered a coding standard. It's a set of rules, techniques, and best practices to create cleaner, readable, and efficient code with minimal errors. They offer a uniform format by which software engineers can use to build sophisticated and highly functional code. Makes sense, right? So why are they important? They, again, coming from the previous sentence, they offer uniformity to the code created by different engineers. They enable the creation of reusable code, make it easier to detect errors, make code simpler, better, readable, and easier to maintain. And of course, this boosts programmer efficiency and generates faster results. And where to start? If you want to apply code standards to your projects, to your repos, what should you do? or even by starting a new repo, a new project, what should you do? First of all, you should start by understanding the language and the framework best practices. You shouldn't just start by writing hello world. Well, you can do that for fun, but if you're willing to develop a project or to continue developing a project, you need to understand the best practices that you need to follow in order to do things with a proper quality that the thing deserves to be done with. And then you need to search for recommended tools, for instance, linters, analyzers, things that make sense to use with that tool. And then 2 very simple steps. Apply those practices and use those tools. You can even start by using a simple IDE plugin like this ESLint one on VS Code. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Now, what can go wrong on IT projects? It's a quick story. Let's say that it's 80% true because I don't want to get sued, okay? And basically, where do problems start? So in the past life, I traveled to a foreign country with the main purpose to discuss some requirements. It was an easy call, talking about some minor stuff, but that I changed a bit and the meeting ended up with the customer saying something like, hey, we need to see the app working or it will be pretty impossible to move forward with the deal. So I had no other options besides starting working on an app that didn't exist and show it. I went back to the hotel and spent a couple of days developing a proof of concept due to lack of resources on our HQ, showcased the app to the customer, and things got a bit back on track. The main purpose was achieved, but the POC was really, trust me, poorly coded. It was just for visual aid, okay? When I got back in the headquarters, I debriefed and handed over to the engineering team, and someone just decided to start working on top of my single project, POC, kind of turning a blind eye to the poor coding that was there because it was already part done and they simply chose, okay, let's keep with this, we will change it later. But one absolute truth is nothing is so permanent as a temporary solution, trust me. And then what it happens, it hits the fan. Of course, we ended up winning the deal, which was good. And after some months, we had to tear down the original project and only the APIs were used. We were able to manage it, but it was a real pain. And in this pain, I want you to remember that number. 40 to 80% of the lifetime cost of a piece of software goes to maintenance. And believe me, this was very close to the 80% of the cost of this project was maintenance and redoing a lot of this stuff, okay? By the way, out of curiosity, what was poorly done? I had all my components tightly coupled. I didn't have configuration files. I lacked tests. And during this whole process, no one said, hey, we should do this in a proper way. That was the main mistake.
Oh, before we move on, that's right. Before we move on, we want to do a quick poll with everybody. So I have launched a poll and you should see it in your screen. It's about what Elio just talked about before when it hits the fan. Have you ever found yourself, your team in a similar situation with a poorly coded project? I'll give you a moment to vote. Okay, we see some votes, just a few more moments.
Don't be shy. You can say no, no problem. Never happened to me.
Okay, some people are voting yes. We will share the results of this poll with you very soon. So for now, only I can see it, but you will see it very soon. Just keep voting.
Should we move forward while
Yes.
we wait? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, the poll has ended. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll share the results soon.
Thanks, Eloisa. Sorry. So, what were the lessons learned from this project? For me, because I'm a solutions engineer, my role is very tight to the commercial side, but I also have some and a lot of technical obligations. So for me, it's do whatever you need to do to close the deal. It's important for you, for your targets, for your company targets, even for your position in the market. But also do whatever you need to do to ensure that you and your team follow the best practices as soon as possible in the project, maybe even right after you type git init. If you can, perfect. Keep in mind that a good plan today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow, but please have a plan, especially since day zero. Otherwise, it will be a problem for you, okay? Cool. Moving forward, after this quick story, how can this be avoided? By applying and enforcing coding standards and best practices is your only hope, okay? What you need to do to apply and enforce. First of all, just ensure that you are using the proper tools. For instance, you're a JavaScript developer, use ESLint. It's an open source tool and it's easy to fine tune. If you're using React or Angular as their frameworks or libraries, you can still use and fine tune ESLint to give the proper results to match your code against the coding standards, okay? And also you should enforce the coding best practices with static code analysis. It can be a pre-commit tool, can be a static code analysis like Codacy, it doesn't matter. And on top of that, never forget that manual code reviews for business logic makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, you can be spending a lot of time discussing if single quotes or double quotes, but what makes you move forward, what moves the needle is the business logic behind your full applications, right? And on top of that, you need to enforce the versioning best practices. It doesn't matter if you have a lot of tools if you don't enforce them to be used. So you should prevent committing to the main branch and especially request peer reviews or tool reviews from your colleagues or tools, okay? Now, sharing the poll results, let me see if I can, or maybe Louisa, can you see them? I can.
Time for the results. I'm gonna click share, so I think everyone should see it now.
Yeah.
Basically 81% voted yes and more than once.
Yeah, there are 2 euros with yes every day. I'm sorry for you guys. I think life will get better for sure. Cool. Thanks for sharing, team. Let me see if I can move forward with this. Now, can Codacy help? Yes, yes, we can. At least more than 800 of our customers say so, okay? And how can Codacy help? Leveraging what we've learned in the previous slides, Codacy released a new feature called Coding Standards for Organizations. It's a place where you can aggregate the coding standards that you want to enforce across all the repos of your organization. This combined with the ability to block pull requests is a pretty powerful feature that will help you preventing the increase of technical debt. So you can simply create a coding standard, you choose the languages that you use, you pick the code patterns you find are valuable for you or for your framework, for your team, for the technical debt that you're trying to fight against. And then you can apply those coding standards or that coding standard to the existing repos that you have, or even use it by default on your repositories. From this moment on, every repo you have or created will have the same coding standard, which means that when your developers are writing code, when your maintainers are writing code, if the code is not up to standards, the PR will be blocked. The developers will be notified that they need to improve the quality of their code. They need to fix the issues that are there in that delta, in that commit, in that pull request. Okay, they'll be educated why the issue exists and fix it, and then reduce your technical debt. But detecting issues is not enough. Again, the enforcement part is also part of the solution. The quality gate is mandatory to ensure the team follows the best practices. You need to combine the outputs of Codacy with the branch protection features within your Git providers. Only that way your code will be protected and safe from new tech debt, okay? And this is what following coding standards looks like. This is an anonymous example of a customer that we helped reducing technical debt. This company started by using Codacy just for feedback. And after some months, they decided to enable the quality gate. Results were very impressive, in my opinion. Around 50% of their issues disappeared in only 3 months, okay? And basically that's it. With all that said, you can only improve if you know where to start, if you know how to search for the best practices of your tool, if you understand that, or of your languages, of your framework, if you understand how to receive feedback from proper linters, tools, analyzers, etc., and how to apply the outputs that you get from those tools or from your peers. And basically that's it. So I will open the floor for any questions that you might have. For this, I will not answer questions about my experience on that job, but feel free to ask about coding standards, okay?
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Can you see?
Yes, from Philip Icky. What does the product flow for working with monorepo type projects within Codacy? Is there a way to specify multiple projects per version control repository? Or does Codacy recommend treating monorepos with multiple logical projects as simple Codacy project? Well, monorepos is it's a cool topic. I really like it. And believe me, it's an internal discussion every week because it's not an internal discussion to Codacy, but the approach to monorepos, I think it divides a bit the industry. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But our approach is pretty simple. You can add your monorepo to Codacy, and there are tools that we support having different configurations for different folders, and there are tools that we don't. For instance, if you have like a monorepo in JavaScript, you can inherit the ESLint-RC configuration files, put it in different folders, and apply different rules. For instance, imagine like you have a Node.js repo and a Node.js folder and a React folder. You can just extend the base ESLint-RC file and apply different rules for each folder. If it's like, for instance, a Java folder or something like a Java project or several Java projects, I think you need to stick with the rules. But if I know Java well, probably you will want those all those rules applied to all of those repos. And basically that's it. Have I answered your question? I hope so.
There's also a question in our in the chat, like the separate chat window, from Alexander Slot.
For some reason I can't see it, but I'm looking. I see it's in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah.
So how would this work when we have example PyLint and ESLint rules in the root of the repo and we want to run linting in a pre-commit hook as well? How can we ensure that we don't have separate rule sets? Well, that's a very good question. Those basically what will happen is you will have two different gates, right? One gate will be the applied PyLint and ESLint in the pre-commit hook. And if you're using Codacy, Codacy will register as a check in your regular pull request, merge request pipeline and block the pull request, merge request pipeline if it's not up to standards. So basically, you are having a double check here with the one that Codacy provides being at the Git provider level and preventing the merge if you have the branch protection enabled there. So you don't need the pre-commit hook. You can commit and still have the analysis after you commit, okay? Before the pull request being merged, of course. I hope this answers your question, Alexander. So you recommend not having pre-commit hooks? I will not recommend. I don't use it, but it's something that I don't think there's anything wrong with having a specific approach as long as you have one, okay? I prefer one approach where there's a centralized gateway control, and that is provided by a tool like Codacy, okay? Where the tool itself, without the ability to be jeopardized by any other contributor, is able to analyze the code and block the PR if it's not up to standards, providing useful feedback for the user. If you want to use pre-commit hooks, there's nothing against it, okay? It's okay, I just prefer, and also Codacy is a centralized gateway tool as well. So have you ever tried Codacy, by the way? If you haven't, it's really amazing. Have I answered your question, Alexander? Just 1 minute or so. Yeah, thank you very much. Cool. And we have another question on our Q&A from Albert Tam. What's the strategy would you recommend if you're inheriting old code and all of that code does not conform to coding standards and there are hundreds and thousands of issues to fix? Albert, believe me, that is our day to day. When we are onboarding new customers, some of them are really scared when they see the first results of the analysis because they are not expecting to see, imagine, if they never used a tool like Codacy or even a small linter, usually they are surprised with the type of issues that you see. But the first thing is to understand that you need to understand is this feedback valuable, okay? Imagine that you see 60,000 issues and this happened last week, but 30,000 are single quotes versus double quotes. This is just a configuration problem. You can just fine tune it and still have only the other 30,000 issues. But the best strategy that I can think of, and the one that I recommend, is that you don't stress, but you try to enforce your team to fix it. First of all, define the quality gate. Don't define the quality gate in the first couple of weeks because the team is getting used to the tool, okay? The team will learn to get the feedback from the tool to see that the check is there. You can click, see the feedback, learn why they have introduced the issue, okay? And then by the process, they will start to understand and getting on board with the proper practice that you're enforcing. After that moment, what I usually recommend is like you define a technical depth sprint where you simply define, or you assign to a team or a set of users, doesn't matter, the task to clean up, for instance, first the security issues, then the error-prone issues, and then you keep digging to try to reduce your technical depth to, well, the number that you define as a target. Ideally 0, but probably can be impossible, especially in big repositories. But basically it's that. So give some time to the team to accommodate to the tool, accept the feedback that the tool provides, and then define the quality gate and define a sprint or a couple of sprints. It don't need to be right back to back, but to start tackling the technical depth, starting by the high priority type of issues. Imagine if you have like 1,000 of SQL injection problems, you should start by that, okay? Have I answered your question, Albert? Cool. Thanks, Albert.
Okay. Does anybody else have a question? You can still ask us questions. And we would also like to know about your experience. What was your experience with coding standards? What went well and not so well? Feel free to share and ask us anything.
And if you're a Codacy user, feel free to give us feedback about your experience using it as this technical depth fighter.
Yes.
Right.
Anyone?
I don't think there are more questions for now, Elise.
It's okay. So we're gonna close the Q&A, but if you still have any questions, you can reach out to us in the Codacy community. Yeah, but I'd like to thank everybody for coming here today and joining us. I hope you learned something today. And like I said, if you have any further questions, you have here 2 links. You can go codacy.com if you are not so familiar with Codacy, and anybody is free to join the community.codacy.com, where we discuss all things code and code quality with other developers, not just Codacy developers, but it's a worldwide community. So feel free to join us and tag us there and ask us some questions. Maybe if you forgot and you remember it later, we'll be there. And yeah, I think we're done.
That's it.
Thank you for coming. Bye.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.